Hi, everybody. I'm Sam Allen. I'm the Vice President of Dover 400. What an exciting year that we have ahead of us here, celebrating 400 years as a permanent settlement. Great to see everybody out tonight. I guess our Facebook blitz worked. Awesome that everybody could make it tonight. I want to thank the library staff for being so accommodating and helping us out to put this event on. I think it fits in really, really well that today is Read Across America Day. So it fits, I think, very well with that theme. We have a variety of events planned. I would direct you to our website, which is dover400.org, to check out what we have planned from June 24th to July 4th. It's still a little bit of a moving target. We're adding things as we go along. We're looking to develop as many partnerships across the community as we possibly can. If anybody's interested in co-branding their event with us, we'd be more than happy to get it onto our page and list it. We know there's a lot of exciting things that are going on in Dover this year, and we really want to make sure that they're all well showcased. Obviously, it takes a village to put on a celebration. And so we really need volunteers. I have a sign-up sheet in the back here. On your way out, if you'd like to just give us your name and your email address, we'll be in touch with you, and hopefully we can put you to work at something during the celebration and something that will fit your interests and your time schedule. Very excited about this event tonight, our Meet the Authors program. We are very fortunate to have some very gifted and talented people that have been working on researching and producing some historical documents for us. And I really think that this is going to become one of the legacies of the Dover 400 people. To start off, I want to just introduce our panelists this evening. This is Cathy Beaudoin. I don't think that she really needs much introduction. I was talking with Cliff earlier and sort of said that Cathy's kind of our historical laureate. I don't think you can go anywhere in terms of asking questions about history in Dover that Cathy either doesn't know the answer to or couldn't find it for you fairly quickly. She's retired Dover Public Library Director, former Citizen of the Year. She's a board member on the Dover 400. She's the co-author of Port of Dover with Robert Whitehouse, which was done several years ago. If you haven't had a chance to read that publication, please do so. It's very engaging. And she's also a trustee of the Woodman Institute, and there's many, many other things that she's involved with. I just wanted to give you a little capsule of her background. Tom Massingham, once again, another person that everybody pretty much knows here in town. Small business owner, has been very involved in things downtown with Dover Main Street. He's also a board member of the Dover 400, has a great repository of knowledge himself about history. Andy Galt, I think many of you know him, former mayor of Dover. Citizen of the Year. Andy was very instrumental in putting together the Heritage book. Actually went around and took all the photographs that you see in that book. So was really a labor of love on his part. He's also very engaged in writing a current history of his church, which keeps him pretty well immersed in this building. We have Jnana Hodson, who's here with us about his interest in the Quaker faith and his book that he's recently published on the Dover Quakers. And he'll be engaging us. He, former newspaper editor, widely published author, has published several books, 9 I think I saw online anyway. You know, he likes to sing, maybe we can get him to sing. He has a very strong interest in yoga and is very driven with yoga. And is an active member of the Quaker faith, so he can give you some great insights into what he discovered. And then Tony McManus, local person, attorney here in town for many, many years. Tony was very helpful to me when I was chairman of Dover's 375th in 1998. He's been, featured columnist in Foster's Daily Democrat, which is where the gist of his book has been drawn from, his columns. So with that, I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to let the heritage people talk first.
So I'm going to kick this off and talk a little bit about the history of this book. This is the one we're talking about, the heritage book. In 1979, a group called Dover Tomorrow decided to have a historic walking tour around Dover and published this brochure, Heritage Walk Tour, June 1979, map on the back, and it was very successful. So it went on for 29 years, in all different neighborhood every year, and I got involved in 1980, and they lasted until, the last one was 2007, and so we ended up with 29 booklets. The problem was, when I was working at the library, is that, oh, I know that's in one of those booklets, and which one was it in? And, no, I remember. And so we had a whole group of people who worked on this, who did the research, who led the walks, and we all want to give proper due to our mentors at the time, Bob Marston and Tom Wells, who were on the committee with me for many, many years, and all the other researchers that took place on this. But we always thought, here we have this disparate collection of walking tours, and nobody would ever put it all together. And so, good information, some of it needed updating, some of it was wrong, some new things needed to be added. So Dover 400 said, wouldn't it be great if for one of our publications we could put these together in a book? And the result is this Dover Heritage Walk, folks, which doesn't include everything, but includes 260 something properties in Dover. It's organized just like a walk. It's lightweight, so you can take it on a walk, and it's organized by neighborhood. And I'm going to pass it along to Andy to talk about how we put it together. But we started getting together last summer or 2 summers ago to decide what to take from these booklets, what to edit, what to add. We needed photographs, we needed organization, we needed some corrections, we needed some updates. And so we worked on whittling it down, getting it in a more compact size. And Andy went around, took all the photographs and did all the formatting. And bless his heart, did the index, which is wonderful. So if you're looking up a house, you can actually find it rather than going through many, many of these booklets. So this is really the compilation of 29 years of work. So it's a lot of information, but it took a lot of people a lot of years to put it all together. We just sort of reconfigured it. So I'm going to pass it along to Andy to talk about his job.
Thank you, Cathy. As she said, when we started, we just had that collection of ephemera. We never intended to be part of a larger work, but we wanted to turn it into one. So the first thing I did was to try to figure out how big this project was going to be. I read every one of the walks, cover to cover, made a list of every property, made notes about the highlights from each description, because each property had a brief description that may have been only 2 or 3 lines, but may have been an entire page in those original brochures. Captured the prominent names and events or incidents that happened there, and also made notes as to whether it might need a revision. Some of them we knew in advance needed to be corrected. Some we thought would need some additional material added. As I went through, I tried to capture on paper what those were. I then ended up with a list of almost 500 properties and locations in the city that had been included in the previous walks. I sorted it by address and got it down to 362 unique ones. So the rest of them were duplicates where the same property had been picked up on multiple neighborhood walks. And so I had gone through, at that point, went back through those and identified which ones had the best description or which ones needed to be merged somehow to go into the final product. I then Google mapped all of the properties to get a snapshot photo of all the buildings, so that I could tell, and that we had it as a reference when we were going through figuring out which ones were gonna be kept and which ones weren't. We knew which building we were talking about. Because after you get past 100 or 200 buildings, you just start, they all start to look alike. Sam Allen and Cathy and I sat down, and Sam deferred to our judgment as to which ones should go in. Smart man, that Sam. We each took our own list and made choices based on what we felt were historically important buildings or locations, or people who were of some significance within the community, had some impact at that site or on that site. Or perhaps the building was interesting architecture or unique or just was pleasant. We discovered that our final list was about 260 in length. We agreed on most of the buildings, but we had some disagreements as to which ones we thought might or might not be included. I then went to work in pulling the text together, merging the descriptions that needed to be merged, looking at the ones that didn't look right and saying, what's missing, what's wrong here, the dates don't make sense. Let's go back and let's start doing the research, deed research, John Scales' book, Alonzo Quint's History of Dover, went back to the original materials to try to figure out what was missing or to make corrections to some of it. A number of the corrections that I came up with were involving the Coffin family, which was a prominent family in Dover that got forgotten by many of the later histories. So my wife is doing research for her own book, and it involved a number of Coffin ancestors and descendants and family connections, and so I had a good resource to go to. And we tweaked a number of references in the book to Coffin property or properties that have been owned by the Coffins to give them credit or to fill in some information. An interesting one that I found that is going to trouble me probably for a long time to come as church historian at the Methodist Church in Dover. The Waldrons did not give the land for the first meeting house at St. John Street and Portland Avenue. That's been published, it's been printed a number of times. Waldrons didn't give them the land. They sold the land to the building committee, and I have a copy of the deed. I think the most important change that I made in the walk and the text was regarding the location on First Street where the sham battle took place. Those of you familiar with Dover history as it's been published, Major Waldron drew a group of indigenous people together for a sham battle, surrounded them, captured them, and sent them to Boston to be dealt with by the government in Massachusetts. That's not exactly how it happened. A book has been published called Our Beloved Kin, A New History of King Philip's War, by a woman named Lisa Brooks, and it was published in 2018. The library has a copy of it. If you have any interest or curiosity about what the problems were between the European settlers and the indigenous people that populated this land, it is well worth the read. As it turns out, Major Waldron invited the indigenous people to that site for a feast. When they arrived, he had them surrounded, disarmed them, and had them all shipped to Boston, all but a handful shipped to Boston, where they were either summarily executed or sold into slavery in the Barbados. There was never a battle or mock battle planned, because as it turns out, there were only 20 or so that were armed. Most of them, 250 of them, were women and children. So this was not a war party, this was not a group of indigenous people who were going to take up arms or join the militia, which is what the story turned into. Major Waldron was also involved in November of 1675 to activities at Machias in Nova Scotia, where he captured and enslaved 17 Wabanakis. At a peace council that he held at Saginaw in February of 1677, he captured and killed several leaders under a flag of truce. This was not an individual who could be trusted by the indigenous people. So what turned into a Indian attack a number of years later, Mr. Waldron had deceived the Indians several times and had a history on it, and it was a question of retribution more than anything else. But back to the book. We initially thought about a coffee table size book, but as Cathy said, question came up, can we have this something that people can carry with them, do their own walks? Because we weren't going to repeat the heritage walks. But when I started playing with the size and started working with the photographs, I found that making it any smaller would have doubled the number of pages, because I'd only be able to get 1 or 2 photographs, 1 or 2 houses on a page. To give the photos ample opportunity for you to appreciate the architecture or the building itself. So that's why it's the size that it is, and why it's a spiral binding. My challenges were not only getting the text to fit together properly, but getting photographs of all of these buildings without cars or people. I couldn't do too much about the telephone lines. I got a few of them in there, but the cars and the people, I found that if I went out between 6 and 7 in the morning on Saturdays and Sunday mornings, most cars weren't on the street. And there was no traffic, so I could stand in the middle of the road and get a picture from any angle I wanted. That was part of the fun that I had with it. But I think the biggest joy that I got, and you folks as authors from previous experience will probably join me in saying that the biggest joy I got was when I opened the package with a proof copy from the printer and saw this in print. There's no feeling quite like that. So that's how we put it together.
So after Andy read it, and Susan, his wife, read it, and I read it for like the 3rd time, he said, we need one more set of eyes on this, because we know we're missing something. So we turned to our cleanup man, Tom Massingham, who knows an awful lot about Dover history, and has been in Dover all his life. He said, Tom, for no recompense whatsoever, would you read this very carefully and make corrections or suggestions, or even look for typos or grammatical mistakes? And he gleefully.
So I got to do what Cathy said. It wasn't quite as easy as putting the book in front of you and being able to flip the pages and look at the pictures, because it was on a laptop. And there was a lot of scrolling and going back and forth, and then making notes of anything that I found that was grammatical or typo or anything that I saw. I said, I'm not sure that's right. Can we double check it before we actually nail it? But it was a pleasure to be able to actually read it page by page. I first knew Cathy through the heritage walks. That's where we first ran into each other. So there was that history, but it was interesting to be able to read this. It was couldn't feel that between the four of us, we would weed out as many possible errors or omissions as we possibly could and make a professional book that was presentable and accurate and looked to be something that people would enjoy reading and hang on to. So I had a good time. Most of the time. Couldn't do it all at once. There were multiple sessions of sitting down and going through 20 pages at a time. There it is.
So I'm going to ask people to, sort of save your questions to the end, if you can, so that we can, move through the program as much as possible. I did forget to say that, we do have books for sale. We do take credit cards. Books for sale in the back. Like I said, we also have a volunteer sign-up sheet back there. So, and the authors are going to stay, and you can, talk to them individually, get your books signed, okay, and take it from there. And I think now we're going to turn to Tony, and let Tony talk a little bit about his project.
But I start out by apologizing. Last week I have new hearing aids, and either the hearing aids or my ears aren't working very well, so if there are questions at the end, you're gonna have to yell at me, because I'm having a hard time hearing. The other thing is that there's something missing from my book. I sent it into the publisher and they did not include it, but there was a preface in which I acknowledged that Carolyn Tremblay, who works here at the library in the reference, is the person responsible for all of the photographs that are in my book. And she was the one who put all of the articles together in a thumb drive and got them in order to send them to the publisher in the first place. So I owe a lot to her for that. And I also mentioned that I gave thanks to Joanne Rohde, who put up with my piles of paper and stuff all over the dining room table for a good long period of time, and all her moral support for the time that I put in on this. Now, these articles started when a fellow named Buzz Deedley, who worked for the Foster's Daily Democrat at the time, called me and asked if I would be interested in writing a historical article for the paper. I hadn't done anything like that before, but I thought it might be interesting. But I had no idea that it would end up lasting over 3.5 years of articles that they published during that time. The early articles included a lot of my own memories, where the stores were, who worked where. When I wrote about the Dow Gray House on Silver Street, or the Mellon House on Silver Street, or the Trickey House at the corner of Trickey and Central Avenue, it was because I had been in those houses in the 40s and 50s. I knew Ruth Gray, and I knew Owen Coogan and the Carberys and the Stonemetzes who lived in the Mellon House on Silver Street. When I wrote about the mayors, I knew growing up Pat Green, Morris Murphy, and Jim Keenan. And Jim Keenan had married my second cousin. I had been inside several of the shoe shops that I have written about. I watched the people working, experienced the noise and the heat that I had to put up with when they were there. One article was about a murder at Kidder Press. The victim was a high school classmate of mine. And I ended up, because I was city attorney at the time and the county attorney was on vacation. So Sunday morning I got called to come in and I had no idea what I was doing, but to handle the investigation, and ended up attending the autopsy. One article is about Louis de Rochemont, who was a film producer and lived in Newington. And they filmed part of a movie called Walk East on Beacon here in Dover on the lower part of Locust Street. And I snuck past the barricades and went in the lines where they were actually filming and watched what was going on at the time. So a lot of these things I still am able to remember, and I hope fairly accurately. For others that you'll find in the book, I may be old, but I still never was here for Henry Law, J.E. Lothrop, Elisha Brown, and others. When I was working on those, I started across the hall from this room in the historical room here at the library. The city directories are full of information. You can follow the history of a single address over 100, 150 years, who owned it, who lived there, who the kids were, where the people worked. Advertisements for a number of the businesses at the time, who owned the business, what they were selling, what the prices were. There was a man named John Scales that's already been mentioned. He wrote a biography of dozens of Dover leaders. And anything you wanted to know about Dover, about sailing ships, the maritime business interests, are Cathy Beaudoin and Bob Whitehouse's book, which was also mentioned. Everything you wanted to know about the waterfront is there. I could, on my own, go to the county courthouse, look up wills and estates at the probate office, and deeds and other real estate information at the registry. There's a great book, there are a few volumes of it around, but called Landmarks in Ancient Dover, by a woman named Mary E. Thompson from 1892, prepared at the request of the Dover Historical Society, back when we had one. And it's an amazing amount of information that is in that, collected in that book. And of course, there are old newspapers, and the library has Foster's Daily Democrat, the Dover Gazette, all the other newspapers that were published here from the 1800s on. And then you have the internet. Interesting what you can find on the internet, and sometimes by accident. One thing will lead to another, and things popped up that I never expected that were listed about Dover, and that would happen. So I was able to steal from a variety of sources. And as I said in the introduction to the book, one thing led to another. The history of a house led to the history of the people who lived there, to the place where they worked, to the church they attended. Then that led to a history of churches. And that led on to the various groups who started the churches. The original Yankees who were here, the early English who came over and established the first church, but the Irish and the French and the Greeks and the Lebanese, all of whom attended these churches, where they were located, how they moved, who the leaders were. And that led, in reading about the various nationalities who were here, that led to stories of the saloons in town, and the restaurants in town, and the neighborhood stores in town. And before you knew it, there were 94 articles. And maybe one or two that somehow missed the cut. There's a website on the internet called Muckrack. And for some reason, they have collected a bunch of the articles from here. And I was looking up, and there was one on Muckrack that's not in the book.
Did you write it?
Now, the article that is on page 11 of the book about the Dover waterfront, that's actually the last article that I wrote. So these things are not in order as they were printed in the paper. But what happened on that, and if you're going to buy the book and read it, I got a response. Buzz Deedley was long gone, and Foster's has gone through 2 owners since then. It's now Gannett, and there's a whole bunch of other people in charge. But the people that I have been dealing with are very cooperative and helpful, and never had any problems. But I sent them that article, and they got an email saying, well, they didn't print it, so I emailed them. And they thought that the article was too contentious. And they didn't want to print it because they were afraid of upsetting the people who were assigned to develop the waterfront. I thought it was perfectly fine. And so, actually at that point, as I said, there were 94 at least. I had about reached the end of the line of working on these. And so I saw her out and I said, I will send you more articles as soon as you print this one. And they never printed it. And that was the end of the articles. But since then, in reading through this here, there were a whole bunch of other things that had occurred to me. Saying, I really should go back and look up this one and that one. So I don't know how long,
The next book.
I don't know how long I'm going to last, but there may be a volume 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Tony, you're up.
Stand up so I can see it, so if you're right in the back rows. But I joked about this being the book that I didn't want to write. Because I had thoroughly revised and reissued 8 novels. The kind of deep revision that you can do now with, if it's an e-book, you can revise, you can change characters, move them around, change titles and so. But 8 books in 8 years of retirement. And, I was tired. I thought it's time to retire. You don't make much money on it, I would joke. I can go take my wife out for coffee or on a royalty check if she doesn't wear pastry. So, we're all in that boat here right now. So buy your books. But this one didn't let up. Several requests for a history of the Dover Friends meeting or Quakers left me feeling that the full story simply hadn't been told. And then I wanted some kind of confirmation that a third of the town had actually turned Quaker in the early 1660s. Oh yeah, and how many people was that? At the time I think we had 60 households in Dover, so 20 families, doesn't sound like much, but it's major. So I sat down and pulled together what I could. For me, the big question, what compelled them to defy the draconian Puritan persecution against the Quakers? I'm going to spare you what Quakers were, but they a whole different culture. Pacifism being one, serving in the militia, honesty, unique culture of plain speech, quality women ministers, largely silent worship in the program, no liturgy, honesty, long list of things. Pretty quickly, I was finding Dover challenges the commonplace history of New England. The place wasn't even settled by 2 brothers, by the way, but by the younger brother and his apprentice. And the apprentice turns out to be a major and largely unsung figure in the development of early Dover, Thomas Roberts. The other brother showed up a few years later from the Plymouth colony. So I got into a lot of the stuff. There's the argument whether Dover was actually settled in 1623. It doesn't appear in the records years later. No, it was settled in 1623. Unless you can come up with a really good argument why Edward Hilton would get the charter for the colony when he was promised one after 5 years. And he got it. Also, down there on Hilton Point, there's a cove. You used to be able to see it before they put up those barriers. It's named Pomeroy Cove. Okay, at the time that Hilton arrived, he was on Pomeroy's ship, Providence. Leonard Pomeroy was Lord Mayor of Plymouth in Devon. Why else would you name it for him? 10 years later, whatever. I mean, things like this would come up, the early history. So after that, it's a whole series of surprises in doing research, kind of like fireworks going off. Dover was a haven for religious dissidents and social misfits. We nearly had the first Baptist church in America. There were skirmishes over the town pulpit. Starbuck family in the New World went to Nantucket from here. And of course, the coffins come into that point. Even as a frontier town, Dover was the largest community in New Hampshire and had much more prominence than we've acknowledged. William Waldron, I called the perfect villain in my book, was even Speaker of the Massachusetts General Court, or Senator. He had a large house in Boston as well as one in Dover, and his ships were delivering in Europe, not just England. Quakers were active in Dover earlier than we suspected, despite out-and-out claims in some otherwise authoritative Quaker histories. Whittier Falls and Whittier Street were named for the famed poet, or rather his uncle and cousins, who were prominent in the emergence of the textiles industry in town. Dover was far more connected to Maine than we've assumed. The heart of Kittery was directly across the Catawba from Hilton Point. In fact, as a widower, Edward Hilton married the girl next door, who lived at the Shapley's Kittery house. Early settlement of Maine was largely on the upper regions of the river, especially the base of South Barrow. Well, I should say the watershed, since that's Salmon Falls. But let's not overlook the fact that our textile mills predate those of Lowell, Lawrence, and Manchester on the mighty Merrimack. The first mills around here were for sawing wood, not grinding grain. The upper Piscataqua was a major shipbuilding center and a prolific fishery. That whole mystery of why up here rather than down on the coast, the fish came to them. And it was far less, if you see the open sea, it's much more protected up here. This has me realize how much the histories of religious and social dissidents have focused on southern New England, while largely ignoring events north of Boston. And Dover has a large history telling that. Perhaps the biggest surprise came in finding that most of the early families in Dover originated in Devonshire, near the southwest corner of England. They had a much different culture from the Puritans, who came from the other corner, beyond London, East Anglia. There's as much of what we consider old England, or from a Puritan point of view, even superstitious and backward. From what I've sensed, that led to deep divisions in Dover, even before the Quaker message arrived. The usual New England histories leave the impression that the wars with the natives had passed with the Indian King Philip's War. Instead, for northern New England, that was only the beginning of decades of bloodshed and violence in what are usually called the French and Indian Wars. Another surprise, does anybody know why the Piscataqua was first explored by Europeans? They were looking for a cure to the French pox, which is syphilis. They thought sassafras would do it. They didn't find much sassafras here, so they continued on down the coast. So, the early history is just really rich, far more to be investigated. So that's a quick sampling of surprises I came across in that project. You'll probably find the Quaker part equally surprising and I hope fascinating. Things like the prominence of women ministers. There's a whole culture, peaceful, honest, culture when we make our group decisions, we never take a vote. We sense consensus. And I think it really influenced the way the town emerged, the way town meeting became more open to other points of view. When the Irish young girls came to town, St. Mary's has a plaque on it. Their first house of worship was built with funding contributions from the Protestants of this city. That was not the case in Boston at the same time. No Irish welcome. And I think it's out of that culture of conflict and re-engagement that Dover got some of this really unique culture that we have. So the Friends Meeting is the oldest independent congregation in the state. The other 4 churches at the time were all tax funded in the state at that time, all tax funded and public supported. The Quakers did not accept it, were not offered them tax money for one thing, wouldn't have accepted it anyway, and they defied paying the tithes as much as possible. So it's a rich history. Okay. As for big challenges in writing a book like this, I found thoroughly revising the next to last draft was very painful. Cutting about 150 pages of manuscript from the opening section was especially so, leaving about half of that to cover the period before the Quakers even showed up. The core story was still ahead. Another difficult challenge was in establishing a consistent tone, settling on what one beta reader, early reader, encouraged a gently laughing curmudgeon narrator. After a career in journalism, I can tell you that inserting myself in the story was very difficult, even if it did transform the volume into something that can now fall into the genre of creative nonfiction. That's a serious category, by the way, you get a college degree in it. When I started this project about 4 years ago, I gave myself a deadline of having it ready for Dover's 400th anniversary. Without that, I'd still be researching. And there are things that come up like the mention with the mock battle. I wish I'd known that. I've read some of Lisa's work. Really wonderful stuff. But there's so much more to get into, and it's contrary history. The thing of selling the natives into slavery. One reason that the natives were sold into slavery from New England was that they would often be exchanged for blacks. Africans, if they escaped, would not be able to blend into the surrounding culture. Slavery was a major part in New England. Okay, COVID restrictions turned into an advantage, especially when my family relocated from Dover to a remote fishing village with a lively art scene at the other end of Maine. Come up to Eastport sometime, it's a 6-hour drive. But it did turn into a perfect writer's retreat for me. I had some photocopied materials from Dover meetings, files of work from a long-standing Quaker faith and practice from the inside, memories of conversations with others, older friends since passed, who collected the materials within their lifetimes. Experience of working in genealogy also helped, especially in connecting the dots between, say, 1640 and 1700 when the Quaker movement actually started to pick up. And there's a lot of material out there, even if you have to look at a lot of it with a grain of salt. But, oh yes, and you can find, even with COVID restrictions, you can find a lot of material online, including George Wadley's History of Dover, largely up to about 1888. They're free. A lot of books that you'd have to go to London or rare book libraries to have access to. I've got them on my laptop. And the beautiful thing about that is you can search those. You don't have an index, but you can look for words. That's a disclaimer. I'm going to say I'm not a professional historian, but I have gleaned what I could from and woven together the findings. I hope it prompts others to dig into the field more. I go for the big picture rather than what my friend calls a footnote historian who spends who labors for a lifetime on one detail. That said, Dover is full of stories that need histories that need to be told, including the other faith communities, and I hope to really get into the families that are part of it. One of the things with the Quaker meeting, when families would marry out, they'd often lose their membership. But where did they go? What values do they carry with them to the others? How does it make the community together? We had a Swedenborgian church in town. Somebody want to do some research? The biographies. Richard Baldwin, definitely a big, juicy book. Thomas Roberts, Edward Hilton, Hansard Knowles, Nicholas Shapley, Sir Fernando Borges, Joel Bean, and Robert Dover, if I might list. Robert Dover, the namesake of our city. We weren't named for the town with the famous white cliffs. And he never came up, by the way. We also need details on their wives. Not that we even know their first names or their family names in many cases. We definitely need to know much more about what the historian David Hackett Fisher calls folkways, the unique cultural things that they brought from Devonshire especially, how they taught, how they, what they ate, how they dressed, even how they built. You know, we didn't build around town greens the way they did in Massachusetts. That was East Anglia. But a lot of suggestive things that I can't quite go all the way with because I want details first. But there's a different way of looking at things. More history. There's a whole shelf of Quaker minutes in our business sessions in the UMass library. I think that's a dissertation for somebody to go through. Trying to read old handwriting and interpret it. But, okay. Oh, yeah. Another thing I'd love to see research. Just what did the proprietors of a colony own? They, in many cases, didn't own the land under it. But what did they get from when the Baron Say-and-Sell and Baron Brooks sold New Hampshire to the Puritans in Massachusetts? What did they get in exchange? How did they do this? You know, what was in it for them? But you get in all these charters and everything, it's like, good luck teasing it out. Oh yeah, and when Dover became part of, when New Hampshire became part of Massachusetts, there were two key provisions that really helped us in New Hampshire. One, you didn't have to be a member of the town church, Puritan church, in order to own land in town or to vote in public elections. So you wouldn't lose you wouldn't be disenfranchised for becoming Quaker or Baptist. Huge difference. So at any rate, if any of you wants a topic to start on, got a list here. So if you're interested at all in the book, let me invite you to a solo gig I have here in the library on March 22, and that was already scheduled before this invitation came through. And another April 18th at the Pembroke Historical Society in down East Maine, but both of them be on Zoom, so you don't have to drive all the way up. Oh, Pembroke. One of the things that's amazing is the influence of Dover families all the way up the coast. I live in a house built by the Shackfords. We started in Dover. Pembroke was founded by somebody named Cathy Nutter Layton. Okay, the Laytons were part of Dover meeting. Cathy or hate evil. Pronunciation's still one. But Cathy Nutter was the second elder of the first parish. He was one of the people who really pushed the persecution of the Quakers that far up the coast. I've also been posting a lot of the material on my blog, Thomas Red Barn, backup material for the last year and a half. And then, of course, there's the book here. So, now we got the questions, huh?
Great, thank you. So, yeah, thank you, guys. You might have some of these, some of the research, some of the information that they found, things that are important to you. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, you mentioned the newspapers that Dover has archived. I think the Library of Congress many years ago microfilmed a lot of newspapers, but I was wondering if the newspapers here have been put into a searchable database yet. I know, for example, in upstate New York, there's a website called Fulton County Postcards. They have like 10 million page newspapers in there. You put the family name in there, and it'll give you within seconds every mention of that name for the past 150 years.
I know they're
But wondering if Dover has that too.
Yeah, they're working on it there at the library. They're digitizing Foster's. They've got 33 years done so far. So it'll be searchable by keyword. And it's a very expensive, very painstaking process to do it all. Because the newspapers, we have them all, but they were only on microfilm, which means you have to come here and use a machine and turn a little wheel and all that. So digitizing is going to be the way to go, but it'll be a long process.
I also actually have some from Dover from the 1810s, 1820s, original copies. Is that something I should bring in to get cheap? Well, library can make photocopies of? Is it something that's probably not
I
unique?
would check with the reference desk and see what, because we may have it already on microfilm, because we've got some things as early as 1800. There are some original bound paper copies, late 1700s, early 1800s, because it was made with rag paper, which didn't disintegrate. So they're still in beautiful shape, and they're kept in the back room. But yeah, I'd say check with the reference desk.
Okay, thanks.
In your heritage book, did you include any lost landmarks, or is it just existing landmarks?
Yeah, we debated about that, but there are some things that we thought were so important that even though they're not there anymore, we still talk about them. Or we used a historical photograph in some cases. Yeah, we can't leave out, certain things that are so critical and crucial to our history that it was a debate on some of those, but
I have a question for Jnana. Knowing the persecution that the early Quakers were subjected to here in Dover, how do you wade through the history, which is typically written by white Puritans, and would reflect some sort of bias in that writing? How do you weed through and separate the cultural bias from the racism to all kinds of different things? How do you get through that?
Well, with the persecution, I mean, the traditional versions would be the Puritan records, but Friends kept record of their sufferings for truth's sake. That they would put it. I mean, they were witnessing for faith and trying to advocate the truth is out there if we're willing to listen for it. So you have two sides to go through. And the biggest problem is, for instance, with the natives, Lisa Brooks' work has been great. But when you're already a minority in the community, you tend to see things a little differently. We have the history, for instance, of Jewish comedians, because they were stepped out of the main culture for so much of what black comedians recently. So you're not always seeing it from the middle of it. But I think a bigger problem is looking at a lot of events from our eyes today, rather than from the eyes back then. I've been finding out a lot more about persecution in Virginia It was harsh up here. But in Virginia, on the paper, we don't know if this actually happened or if it happened and this wasn't recorded. If you missed public worship 3 times, that's a capital offense. It's 3 times in a row. Up here, you get fined. You know, it might be 2 cows, as it was for Thomas Robinson, the equivalent of 2 cows. But you know, a lot of also the politics and religion were so tightly intertwined. You know, Puritans were anti-monarchy. And so one of my arguments to, you know, we get the whole thing, oh, Puritans came for religious freedom. You know, New Hampshire was settled for monetary reasons. That's not quite right. Exeter and Hampton were both settled for religious freedom from Massachusetts. But the Puritans came over for monetary gain. But their genius was that they formed a company and they brought the charter to the New World so that the king couldn't get involved with it. They had their stockholder meetings in Boston. You know, it's nuanced in a lot of different ways.
Eddie, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You're out there standing in the middle of the street, taking pictures of people's houses. Okay? They look out the window with their coffee and they see you out there taking a picture of their house. Did you have any spirited conversations with anyone through this, or
Well,
did you have to get permission?
He
Or?
said he wore his Dover 400 badge.
Yeah, I had my Dover 400, I was dressed well. I had my Dover 400 cap, ball cap on, and I always had my little nameplate, and I had a clipboard. So I tried to make myself look official. But it's funny you should ask, I was very much aware that might happen, because I know that from the original heritage walks, occasionally they would run across someone who owned one of the houses that was on the walk that didn't like a whole bunch of people parading along the sidewalk in front of the house gawking at it. And they let people know it. So I was prepared for that, which was another advantage of going out at 6:30 or 7 in the morning, because most people were otherwise occupied with eating, I think, at that time. But I did not get accosted by anyone. I was prepared to apologize vociferously or whatever. But I did run into a few people who asked me what I was doing, and when I told them I was recording historical buildings for the Dover 400 committee, they thought that was a great idea. And in fact, I had somebody who was visiting Dover talk to me on 2nd Street when I was down there taking photos of buildings. And he was from England and was visiting. And so he and I had a nice chat about what was considered old. And having traveled in Europe myself, I could agree that yes, 400 years is a pittance compared to some of the things that you folks have over there. But no, I was never accosted, but I was always prepared for it. I was parked on the right side of the street, pointing in the right direction.
I have a particular interest in both the rail line that used to run where the community trail is now, and also, I guess there was a streetcar over to Kittery.
Mhm.
Are there any good resources about histories about either of those or
There's a
both?
good pamphlet of the historical about all the rail lines.
Oh.
Yeah. The story I like is that the street railway, originally it was a horse street railway. It was owned, the president was a woman. She was the first president of a railway company in America, Mary Dow. And there was a national news article about her, and it said, Mrs. Dow is just the man for the job. Anyway, the horse railway, which ran from Sawyer Bridge up to Garrison Hill, was pulled by horses, and then it was electrified in the 1890s, somewhere, 89, 90. And then eventually it became, the Dover, Somersworth, and Rochester Street Railway, and it ran up to Willamette Pond. And when it was, that lasted till I think the mid-1920s, and they called it the DSNR, which stood for damn slow and rough.
Also the Portsmouth, Dover, and York.
Yeah.
Street with
Yeah, that,
Bull Dragon Yank. It was a book by O.R. Cummings about Dover Street Railway. I don't initial O.R. Cummings.
I think that's the one that's.
Yeah, I don't know.
Library has it, or?
In the store, right across the.
Kathy, I know that when the Heritage Walks first started, there was, I don't know how it overlapped, but there was some interest in some parts of Dover to develop a historic district. Did you guys get pushback when you were doing the walks, that this was just another way of getting in?
I don't ever see them conflicting. There were some people who were researchers for the walk. Tessa McDonald was one, and she was on the Historic District Commission. But those of us doing the research on the walks were never actively involved or conjoined with the Historic District Commission. So, no, nobody ever complained to us or really said, just one lady on Arch Street came out and yelled at me when I was leading a walk. I was not on her property, I was on the sidewalk. She came out and just, went down one side and down the other, but, no, I think the Historic District Commission had a different set of problems with people not wanting them, someone telling them what color they paint their house.
And this is for Jonah. You seem so involved in this. I could see the inaccuracies driving me crazy, the injustices, and I can feel the pain and the whatever. I just wondered how you could research all this and then sleep at night. And then how can you bring it out in any kind of positive way and not just.
Well, it helps to have a martini before going to bed. Actually, one of the old Quakes in Dover was famous for his. Now, a lot of Quakers don't drink at all. Of course, in the one period, well, Puritans love their beer. We'll start with that. Looking at images, you think pretend, no, they love their beer. But things evolve. Friends, for instance, would not just, well, if somebody were seen disguised by hard liquor, is the phrase, it would be, usually he would be counseled. And you've got to bring this under control. But it would be eldering, communal discipline together. But we had one friend from Long Island helped reopen the meeting house back in the 50s. But Silas was renowned for his martinis. Of course, I was told after the third one was Mark Twain. I don't know if that's true or not. Chuck, you've known longer than I did.
I just heard stories that he like martinis. I don't know more.
The stories, yeah. But
He said reopened the meeting house. Was the Dover first meeting inactive?
in the what was it, about 1920 or so, the membership had shrunk so in Dover. We still officially were part of Galt meeting in Rochester, so officially we continued the whole period, but they will just open it up on for quarterly meeting, weddings, or things like that. And then in the 50s, we kindled it. But histories of churches, they grow and they go down. One of the things that amazed me is the extent to which Dover meeting reached out across Maine, up into the White Mountains, up to Chico, across the state, and even we had a significant number of people in Iowa and Minnesota in the 1840s and 50s in Dover. And some of them went on to California and found participation in meetings there and 2 colleges. the thing of thinking of Dover as being insignificant. Two of the Tuttles did some major work with American Indians out in, I think, the Northwest, but spent several years of their life working there. And that's a whole history being researched. Sometimes you think you're doing good, and you get caught in a bind between the government and values, or trying to turn people to be agricultural rather than traditional ways, and so on. So, looking at that, that's the more difficult stuff really sometimes to look at when we see good intentions that they have unexpected consequences.
The cemetery up next to the log graves is a Quaker cemetery.
Right.
Is that,
Mr. Brown?
yeah, is that, an old cemetery or?
It started out as a family cemetery, the Brown family. And they get into a little bit with T. Worcester. His family, well, he and his brother, his father and his uncle went from Dover to Philadelphia. And they were in dry goods. So I'm wondering if they were selling some of the early textiles. So, things to investigate, but with those kind of connections. But T. Worcester, his father married into a prominent Philadelphia Quaker family. And there's a saying about Quakers, when Philadelphia you do good, and they did very well indeed. And, it's quite a character.
I have a question. In researching the heritage walks, you said you went back and looked at some of the old deeds and things. I'm wondering just how good are the Dover records? Are there gaps because of fires or floods or different things, or how good are the records?
City Hall burned down 3 times. We're on our 4th City Hall right now. So yeah, every fire lost records. So yeah, there are definite gaps.
So I'm Kevin McEnany. I'm the chair of the Dover 400. And saying everybody's doing a great job here. I was very thrilled actually that Jnana had said that there were a bunch of misfits in Dover, because I consider myself a Dover misfit. I'm born and raised here, and I'm looking around the room, and I'm not going to point anybody out, but I see a lot of Dover misfits here. I think all of them would be proud to be misfits. You guys are doing a great job. This is a wonderful time.
I was just wondering, what's the oldest house in Dover still standing in? And I guess my second question, is there any program, is there anybody out there trying to identify at-risk structures, old houses, and things that are at risk of falling apart, being torn down, anything doesn't say it? Because I've seen a bunch of colonials torn down since I moved here. That's sad.
So I think the oldest house now is the one near the corners of Silver Street. Get me colored the name. It's 1708. It's still a residence. Now it's covered in ugly, I don't want to say ugly. It's covered in weathered brown shingles. And the granite steps are like right on the sidewalk. And it's further set toward the road than all the other houses. We think the dam garrison at the Woodman is obviously the oldest, but nobody lives there, at least not lately. And so we think it's the 1708 house.
The original foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah, what about the house on the corner of Silver and Locust, the Hurd?
Yeah, that's 1723, the Dow House, yeah. It's close, it's 20 years newer.
It's well restored. That's
Oh, yeah,
really
very
nice.
much so, yeah.
I'm not aware of any official listing of houses with, like the endangered list that the historical research folks in Concord issue. But this is now a collectible item, by the way, because when I graduated with a master's degree in solid state physics. I went into solar energy in Colorado and came back to Dover and set up a solar heating company of my own in Dover. Little known fact. Because it wasn't here very long. But I set mine up in the Dover Improvement Association facility on 6th Street. Those of you who have read the book would recognize it by a different name, Weiss Lawrence Shoe Factory, which is now a cellar hole. So there's a photo of it in here. I got it before it was torn down. I'm not sure how many other buildings that I took photos of that will not be here, but that was one of the things that I enjoyed doing, was recording for posterity, just in case they weren't there. Some of the buildings that we had on the heritage board that I would have included in the book
Yeah, Joseph
aren't there.
Joseph Morrow's house on the corner of Fifth Street in Central. It's now, what is it, some kind of bank?
Eastern Bank.
Eastern Bank. That was a historic house. That bothered me when that was torn down. And then the other one that bothered me was the Dunn Tavern, just after the Sawyer Mills Bridge, as you heading went all the way up towards the high school. That 1750-ish tavern.
That was taken apart piece by piece,
Yeah, sorry.
but it's still going.
There are other old houses, there's a couple on Upper Central Avenue, well, 757.
757 and
And on the other side,
750,
it's 753, 51, are both, you don't recognize them.
And one of those is coming down, right? For the-
Actually, it's being built all around.
Yeah, it's gonna stay.
Question in the back there.
I actually have two. So I was doing a project over the summer for the humanities in the community. And one of the things I had come across was the Abraham Lincoln, that whole him coming and taking his historic walk to get his hair cut, during his time, his stay here. And I couldn't for the life of me find exact information about where exactly he walked. It was just kind of, I think I read the Foster's article about it. It was more recent, so they kind of brushed over the actual walk. I was wondering, is that a part of the Heritage Walk? Do you guys?
I've heard that story too, that while he was here, he stayed here at the Corporation House, right up here on
Yeah.
Walnut Street. So sometimes people still call it the Lincoln House, but he only spent one night there, so.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
It was a Corporation House where the head of the mills lived. And he supposedly walked somewhere and got a shave and a haircut,
Yeah.
but I've never heard.
Yeah, I haven't been able to figure it out. I've been digging deep, but I couldn't find it. And then I guess my other question is more on that structure side of things. Over on Dover Point, I believe it's Dover Point, there's a little, it's early 1800s. I'm pretty sure it's at 1820s, 1830s or something. And it's just a structure, small little, what I would assume was a parish church, just something small. But I couldn't, I wanted to look into that and see if that's been named historical.
The two white buildings before the furniture store.
I think so, yes, yeah.
One was a fire station, one was a school.
Okay, I was it's either a church or a school, so I was yeah, okay. And is that being taken care of, has, are
One
people,
was a school, it was called the Lower Neck School,
okay,
and the other one was a firehouse.
okay.
That was known as Lower Neck.
Is that being taken care of right now? Is it?
The firehouse, interesting, because I'm on the board at the Woodman Museum, and the Dover Firefighters Association, whatever it's called, they're raising money to move that firehouse to the grounds of the Woodman Museum, because they also have an 1860s hand tug that they keep up at the fire station, and they want to move that into the old fire station and have it on the grounds of the museum.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, 'cause
Hopefully they'll preserve that.
that's what I was hoping, because I could see that it was getting weathered, and we all know that the garrison's being sheltered, for historical purposes, so I just found it interesting that it, it hasn't been sheltered yet.
Maybe next year they're hoping to get it moved.
Do you guys is there a system for volunteers for that type of stuff?
I haven't heard of anything yet. I think they have to raise some money first. So, and then they'll probably ask for volunteers to help on the move, but they're not.
Is it Dover professional firefighters?
Yeah, Dover professional firefighters, yeah. But, you know, they're not a 501c3, and in order to raise the money they want to raise, they have to become a 501c3, so they're going through that process first. And once they are that, then people will be able to donate to the fund as a tax deduction.
But you're more than welcome to volunteer for the Dover 400.
Hey, I'm all in, let's go. I'm a history major right now at Great Bay with, you know, big dreams, so start chasing them now, you know? Thank you.
That's, my name's Tom Hardiman, and I'm a lifelong resident of Dover. And listening to the talk tonight, there's two things that I've always been amazed about. One of them is if you go down towards Tuttle's old farm there, and you head down towards the river, a short ways up that road, there used to be a plaque, that was the shoreline of the river. And I couldn't believe that there's that much land with all those houses on it now between there and the river that it came. But it makes logical sense if the king gave the land to the Tuttles, the river was probably bordering the land. But I just can't believe the river came up that far. The second thing that amazed me about religion, this is kind of a comical thing, and I know with Tony and Kevin and Art, they're all graduates of the academy here in Dover. And I was reading in Foster's one day, talking about religious acceptance, that the bishop came to Dover and said mass for the students at Dover Catholic, St. Mary's, at the First Parish Church, so it could hold everybody. And I'm thinking to myself, when I went to school there, we weren't allowed to sit on the wall. So tolerance must be coming forward. Those are my two insights.
Another question there somewhere?
I have a personal interest in Marilla River. Is her home still standing?
Yeah, it's in the book. It's, I forget what address, Summer Street. We'll look in our index. I think it's not a single family home anymore. I think it's an apartment. That's our.
I'm the town historian for the town of New Durham, so that's the
So
person.
she was
She was born in New Durham.
yeah, and I think her ashes were scattered up there. She's not buried in Dover.
Correct. Her ashes were supposedly scattered underneath the apple tree along the farm.
Yeah.
On the hill.
Yeah.
I have pictures of her.
That's not her.
I think it's 78 or 80 Summer Street.
Yeah, I guess we were talking about the oldest houses in
52
Dover.
Summer Street.
The oldest sanctuary in Dover is the current Friends Meeting House. That was 1768. And that was the third meeting house that the Quakers had in Dover. I think the first one was down in Dover Point, and then there was
Spring Street.
one that's very close to there, which is now present. John, you probably don't want to.
Second meeting house, Silas tried to find, it was really,
Spring Street.
now it is, but originally it was the corner of Locust and Silver Street.
Yeah.
And so Silas and I were looking all around, it might have been put in another building, you know, built the way they built onto it and everything. And so it was from one of those walks, we sort of shade out at the Chamber of Commerce. So I'm walking the meeting one morning, I picked one up. Silas was gone at this point, but wow, mystery solved, so thank you guys.
So that would have had to been a very early house too.
Yeah, it probably wasn't ready in the 1830s by us for that site.
Yeah, that's the original building would have been before.
Yeah, 1720s.
And there's a lot of reuse of buildings done. A number of the houses on Fifth Street were cut literally out of a warehouse, a long warehouse building, The managers of the mill needed to build housing for their workers, so they took a long factory building, chopped it into pieces and moved them on the individual foundations and turned them all into little houses. So if you drive down Fifth Street, look for the little small houses, little capes, like a story and a half. And you'll notice that there are several others on the street that now have a second story on them or have a huge wall on one side or what have you. Those used to be a warehouse.
You just made me think of Monroe Street, where all the little houses are, they're almost identical, both sides of the street. Do you know the history of that?
Sawyer Mills.
Sawyer Mills.
Mill housing for the Sawyer Mills workers.
With the architecture, I'm not sure about on Wall Street, but some of the ones on Local Street, the, what do they call it? The canopy in front of the doorway has hanging down
On Monroe Street.
the things they use in the mills.
Bobbins.
Yeah.
Oh, really? I never did that. On Monroe Street.
I'm not sure about Monroe, but a lot of those houses that look like the factory houses around town, if you look, there's a canopy at the front door and then a decorative.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
And the tenth again. The tenth.
Can you talk at all about the mansion that used to be located where Dairy Queen used to be and where Hojo's was? Yeah. Can you talk about that place?
Yeah, what's under Jonathan's story?
Here it is, 47 Central Avenue, the Jonathan Sawyer Mansion. 26 rooms, built during the Civil War, it cost $250,000, had a 5-story front tower. Jonathan Sawyer, who owned the mills, was there with 7 children. Included a 40 by 19 foot garden and 12-foot ceilings, frescoed with gold leaf. It had 17-acre grounds with stables, carriage house, coal cellar, fruit orchards, greenhouse, an artificial pond supplied with water from the mill reservoir. And eventually it was taken by the state or the city for lack of payment of taxes. It was raised when the Spalding Turnpike went in 1959.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you, sort of halt the questions for now, and